Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. And, as I promised, we are going to be taking a look at putting together maps for your campaign world. And let me just start off by saying there are a lot of great resources online for helping do all of this. Incarnate and several others, which I'll post some links to down below, but there's just something about having physical copy in your hands that you can hold and show to your players. And doing that is actually relatively simple, and I find it to be quite a bit fun. And I've got a couple of tips, tricks, and ideas here for doing so. But to get started, of course, obviously you're going to need paper. You're going to need a pencil. You're going to want a pen, something with a fairly fine tip to it. You're also going to want an eraser to erase the lines, because we're going to be drawing out very light lines here. And while not strictly necessary, this, what is this? I believe from a French ruler. It basically just has a French curve ruler. This will help with certain designs. Like if you're drawing out your compass, or you're drawing out, you're marking out lines for where you want to put names for different things, different regions, mountain ranges, and the like. This can kind of help you with sketching some of that out. And it's a pretty handy tool, actually. Another thing that you can make use of, you want to use either rice, dried beans, or, since we're all gamers here, dice. Dice are really a very handy tool. Because what you'll do with them is you're going to use these to kind of get the general shape of the landmass that you're going for. Now, one thing that I did earlier, because, well, you don't want to just flesh out one single continent. You want to have your world drawn up. I did this earlier, used dice, and I used my number 2 pencil to sketch out the lines really quick. And then I went over it all with my pen, and it came out a little bit smoother to start with, but you can just use that as a general guide and start making some of these more jagged formations here and there. And you kind of want to make everything look like it used to go together at one point. And another thing to bear in mind when you're making a map, especially a hand-drawn map, no map, even if it's done with computers, mapped out with laser-guided everything, you're putting it on a 2D plane, it's never going to be 100% accurate. So you don't have to worry about this being 100% accurate. It's a hand-drawn map. Even the most skilled cartographer in the world is not going to get it 100% accurate. There's going to be some things that just don't fit. So don't worry about anything like 100% accurate. It has to be, perfectly scaled. You have your scale here at the bottom marking out how many miles or kilometers things are apart and how much distance. Don't worry about any of that. Just don't worry about any of that. The goal here is to have fun and come up with some kind of a rough guide for your players, a rough guide to the world. And even if you go, oh, yeah, the map shows that this village is, a week away from where you're at, but it's actually only 5. That's fine. That's just simple human mortal errors in map making, which is absolutely fine. You can absolutely do all of that. So, we're going to start by shaping out our landmass. Now, since we've already sketched out what the world looks like overall, this kind of gives us an idea of what we want to build here for the specific region we're looking for. And we're going to look at a region that's between 2 continents overall. Let's use those ones. Let's see here. So, I like the idea of using this peninsula. Let's bring this down a little bit lower. And this is why you want to use dice or something, dice, rice, or any sort of malleable, movable series of objects, because then you can adjust as you want, as you need to. And you see here that I'm running out of dice, but we're just worried about getting this peninsula, this bottom portion of the continent here, and then this top portion right in here. That's all we're really worried about here. So even if we don't quite have enough material for everything we're wanting to go for, this is the start of that landmass, and this is the bottom portion of that landmass. So all we really need to do is start moving some dice around here. And this is a fairly zoomed in portion of this region, and this is scalable. I could just use my dice to get the shape of this one whole continent right here if I wanted to, but by picking out two separate continents and with the histories that I have figured out here, I can start ballooning things out, going down south through this continent and start going up north and then west with this one, and start actually getting details figured out for all of these other continents. And some people will rag on the fact that, oh, you're only fleshing out one continent, one world. Well, there's nothing wrong with just fleshing out one world. I actually made that joke myself in the poll that I posted, but there's nothing wrong with just doing one continent. If that's all the area you're building and focusing on, and that's all the area that your players are really going to be experiencing, then there's no problem with that. There's no problem with that at all, because it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort to homebrew a unique world all your own. So despite the jokes, despite the memes, there's no shame in that. There's no shame in that at all. It's a lot to come up with all of these things. I mean, look at how many videos I've posted. Yes, they've only been, at 15 minutes tops in some instances. But and for me, because I just have done homebrewing so much for so long, I won't say it's not super difficult. I mean, I'm just used to it. I'm just used to doing that, but it takes a lot. It takes a lot of time and research, and I find things like the different indigenous peoples of Siberia. Like, I find things now and then that I just really don't know much about, and have to spend more time researching and reading up on. And all of that takes time, and then with everything else that life can throw your way, I get it. Building one continent in and of itself, and its histories and everything going on, that takes so much time, effort, and energy. So, don't worry about building one continent, or one continent at a time even. Because if that's all your players are experiencing, that's all you really need to do. And hell, even if you go so far as to build a whole continent with so many different peoples and cultures and histories, that's a lot for your players to even go through and experience, and it's doubtful that they're going to retain a super huge amount of it. And I'm one of those people that just retains everything, but sorry, I'm kind of rambling now at this point, but you get the idea. You get my point. You get my reasoning here. If you're only building one continent, there's nothing wrong with that. The fact that you're homebrewing and building a believable history and world, that's more than enough. And this might be a little bit light here, especially with the ring light going, but you get an idea of what this all looks like here. And it looks like it kind of went together at one point in time, but years of erosion, not to mention all the different magic disasters or effects that could have happened, can easily begin reshaping coastlines. So now we've got our rough, lighter sketch done here. We're going to take our pen and we're just going to go over all of this here. And like I said, it's a good idea to not make big, smooth lines, because that's not how coastlines and land masses typically form, because of the way erosion works. Things are not consistently smooth and uniform. So we just use this as a guide, and we kind of try to form things with that in mind. And don't be afraid to go off of your guideline either, because that's just all it is it's just a guide. There we go. Alright. Southern end of a continent done. Now let's get the north side of this continent. Okay. Alright, there we go. So now we've got our continents done up, and as I'd mentioned before, given the different fantasy races, cultures, and factions that we're representing here, we're going to be making use of the Spartan-styled hobgoblins. We're also going to be using the Roman-styled dwarves, the ogres, the warforged, and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and start figuring that out here. So actually, we're going to figure out terrain here, but since we know kind of generally what we're looking for, with dwarves, we're going to want a mountain range, and you can, again, use your pencil to go ahead and start figuring out generally where you want things placed. So since we're going to start off with mountains and do a little bit of forest too, it's handy to take your pencil and kind of mark off the areas where the mountain ranges are going to be. And you just do it nice and light. You just kind of go on out here. And remember, like before, it doesn't have to be exact. And you can adjust as much as you want or need to, just so long as you have that rough area sketched out. And you do the same thing for forests as well, marking off forests and the like. And mountains typically have some amount of forestation around them, or at least around where I live they do, and I like the idea of doing that. So gonna mark off a little bit of forested bits here on each side of this mountain range. And because mountain ranges are typically along the fault lines and stuff for tectonic plates and everything, since this mountain range comes through here like this, we can generally presume that the mountain range is going to be roughly continued in some part through the part of this northern part of the southern continent here. So we mark that off. And then we'll worry about rivers, lakes, and the like later. We want to get some of these larger geographic features defined first, because, you know, lakes and reservoirs build up in mountains, and the mountains build up snow, and the snow melts down, comes down in rivers down into other lakes and reservoir areas, and that kind of spreads out from there, typically eventually running out towards oceans and the like. So getting our mountain ranges figured out will be very helpful for that. Let's see. You know, speaking of being able to adjust and move things around, I'm going to move this mountain range that I marked off on this southern continent and move it so it's more over here. And make it a bit bigger. And this is where it's very handy to not be worried about making adjustments as you go. So now we just start marking off our mountains, and all you're going to do is just make nice, easy pyramid shapes. I started using my pen. It's probably better to start off with your pencil first, but pen is fine as well too if you're comfortable with what you're doing. You just make nice, easy triangles. And again, it doesn't have to be exact, as your players will get the idea. And one other thing I forgot to do here, but again, we started off early enough and easy enough, and it's another reason why you should start off with pen. We're going to be marking off where we are naming our mountain range, and that's where this gets to be pretty handy here, using this French curve. Let's do it this way. There we go. And then we can come up with a name for that later, but we're going to leave ourselves some space for writing out the name. So we're just going to do the edges here and kind of staggering it so that it goes left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right will save you some time. And overall, this can end up being a relatively quick process. The more you do it, the faster you get at it. And I don't do this frequently, but you can still see how relatively fast this is going. And I find it to be, personally, more worthwhile than just using different applications online. Though, again, there's nothing wrong with that. That's just a matter of preference. And my preference is I like having physical copies of maps for my players. So you can see how quickly this goes. So we've got that marked off. One thing we need to keep in mind as we do this is that we want to leave space for marking off where different cities are at. And we need to do that in the mountain ranges here because this is where we're putting those dwarves. So we don't want to completely fill it in yet, since we don't know 100% exactly what where we're putting everyone. And if we do it too soon, too fast, we can easily fill this up really, really quickly and leave ourselves in a tight spot. In fact, I probably did too much as it is, but mostly just marking off the borders there, that's more than enough. We can write out the name of the mountain range and start marking off different locations where we're going to put the dwarves at. And we do the same thing down here for this mountain range as we mark things off for where we are putting our fire giants. And we'll go ahead and just skip a bit of time here real quick. Alright, so now we've got that marked off a little bit more, and you can see I kind of started throwing some mountains just outside of what my general guide was, because, like I said before, nature doesn't really flow in those kinds of lines. Things kind of spread out a bit more, and I'll probably do the same down in here at the peninsula, but again, I left myself room because I want to mark off where we have different cities, towns, ports, and the like, so it's good to try to leave yourself some room while getting some of your general guidelines down. But now we're going to move towards one of the most difficult parts for any map, and that's naming things. So for this mountain range, let's see here. Let's go with the Houseput mountain range. So we're going to sketch that out. And we're doing it fairly lightly like before. And like I said, it doesn't have to be 100% exact. It's hand-drawn, and so it'll kind of, any little errors that you have are going to give your map that little bit of character in feeling like they're hand-drawn. So don't be worried or afraid of making mistakes. And besides, we're drawing this lightly at first. Alright, there. Now, we go over it with our pen. And we can make these lines a little bit thicker too, so they stand out just a little bit more. Now that we have our rough sketch figured out. There. The Houseput Mountains. Alright, and then we just fill in our details from there. We have our forests. We know we're going to be putting the ogres right around in here, dwarves through here, hobgoblins here, and because we're going across the way, we're going to have our Warforged Empire all along through here, and then the fire giants down in here. Over here are going to be the orcs, but they're kind of off the map here from where we had started off originally. And this leaves us room for other different things that we can mark off, where we might have dragon caves or where griffins tend to frequent and the like. And we can start to chart and plan these different things out. Now, these forests, I would say, are probably not large enough for doing different high elven kingdoms and the like. We definitely want them in a much more forested region than this, but this still gives us a pretty good start of how we want to chart things out. And you can see this didn't really take me all that long to get this far. I mean, we can already see where some natural areas for different towns and ports would be, like this little bay right here, the end of the peninsula. We can already begin to plan things out somewhat, and marking it off will be easy enough. For any town that's going to be a major port, just draw. Remember, use pencil. Just get your rough sketches done first. But you can use an anchor symbol to mark off where you want these things to be. And it's just quick, simple, and easy. Now, putting names down on things might be a little bit tricky at first, because sketching all that out and planning where you want everything to be can be difficult, but it's still doable. Like, we'll probably have a lake up in here and near the lake, because every society of mortal creatures is going to need some kind of freshwater source, and fresh water also allows them to produce supplies. We'll probably want to put the dwarven capital somewhere right about here in the middle of the Split Mountains. And bear in mind, the dwarves might have a completely different name. You could photocopy this map before I had marked this off with pen. You could photocopy this about 6 or 7 different times and come up with different maps, just changing the names depending on which faction you were going for. The ogres would call this something different. The dwarves might call this something different. The hobgoblins, etc., etc. You get the idea. But because the dwarven capital is a mountainous city, and definitely a bit more fortress-like, given that, Roman-themed, imperialism, militaristic, doing a fortress-style design to mark off where their capital is would not be out of place. And we can change up the design later too, because this rough, crude sketch of a fort looks more something like human or ogre. It's not necessarily dwarven, but marking off roughly where we want it and what we want to do with it will be useful. And I went a little bit darker here than I should have, but I wanted to make sure that this showed up for you here. But yeah, overall, this is pretty simple, pretty quick, and pretty easy. And you can start marking off so many other things. You can have great sections for forests. You can draw big areas for all of that. And this might be the start of where the high elves live. Over here is this massive forested region. And remember, our guidelines are just that. They're just guidelines. You can adjust, erase, and move these around as much as you need to before you start putting ink down over everything. So we can mark off other areas that we want to make use of as well. Lots of coastline here, so definitely lots of coastal villages and towns to take advantage of that. And then, since not everything is going to be, not every bit of the coastline is going to be appropriate for having larger ports, or even just small to medium-ish ports, it might just be simple fishing villages. You can just put down a quick little building. Just a quick, easy little design like that. Just a crude house design to indicate, hey, somebody lives here. A group of people lives here. And that just does so much for you. This already looks so heavily populated, and all we've really done is drawn on a couple of anchors, put a fort there, and one little house right there. And this tells you so much and tells you how much more you can build. And this crisscrossing network of trade, even if they're not trading with each other, this coastline with all these different ports allows so much trade to conduct just internally for this one continent. Not to mention just all these other ports springing up here. So you can really begin to add in a lot of detail, but we've run into so much here that we're going to go ahead and stop it from now. But you can see, this has been, 20 minutes altogether, give or take. So 20 minutes, and this has already done so much. But we'll go, like I said, we'll call it here. We'll pick this up next time around. I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Remember, if you're new here to the channel, go on down there to hit the subscribe button and become a regular member here at the Gamers Den. Or if you have already done that, then go on down to hit those like or dislike buttons and leave your comments and thoughts down below, and we'll catch you around next time. But for now, I've been your host. Thank you very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.